Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of MMT Mondays. Before we get going, if you haven't already, make sure to check out last week's episode where we dove into why a $15 minimum wage was the beginning and how a federal job guarantee was our path to achieving it. This week, we're going to continue discussing the transformative effect of a federal job guarantee. We're going to see how MMT explains that once you're able to get past the myths of inflation, then the benefits of a job guarantee can help bring about a more balanced economy. Unfortunately, though, political hacks prefer to cycle between irrelevant narratives about inflation that they can't even remember which hypocrisy they're pushing. Are we strapped for cash, or will trillions of dollars overheat the economy? The argument against equitable prosperity as government policy cycles back and forth between these two when both are extremely faulty points in the first place. Once we get past these irrelevant myths, we will see that the inequalities in this country didn't happen by accident. Those in power created this imbalance for a specific reason. A federal job guarantee will help shift that balance of power to help bring about not only a more balanced economy, but a more just society. In our first video, we see a recent interview that Real Progressive's own Steve Grumbine participated in with the Wisconsin chapter of Our Revolution. And in it, they discussed how income inequality and social justice was a major issue. Grumbine begins by laying out the argument for MMT by seeing that it doesn't explain how things are funded, but rather MMT is a lens to show how the system works and does not work. After laying out the main argument for MMT, Grumbine goes on to explain how inflation doesn't go up because of printing too much money or full employment, but rather it depends on the real resources available for purchase.
And what you normally hear from the mainstream media and establishment politicians is that we can't afford these social programs that would actually uplift working class people that most countries actually have. But I think modern monetary theory would disagree that we can't afford these social programs. Can you explain to us how we can fund, these progressive social programs through MMT and basically, yeah, that's the question.
Okay, so first things first, you don't fund anything through MMT. That's the best part of it. MMT is a lens that describes the way the system works and does not work today, and especially from going back to some of those graphs from 1971 to present, when Richard Nixon took us out of the Bretton Woods Accord to remove us from the gold standard. At that time, it was more of a global gold standard, whereas the United States had become the de facto reserve currency and so forth. And a lot of people really stuck, like they have this time stuck where they're living in 1970 and they can't get past 70. They're staying in 70 economically, and they don't understand that major shift that occurred when Nixon took us off that. What Richard Nixon did, as bad as Tricky Dick might have been, what he did was he removed the peg to gold. So we had a free floating fiat currency. It's no longer tied to a commodity, meaning that we can produce it at will without any kind of concern for affordability. The United States government is a monopoly issuer of the dollar, just like Australia is a monopoly issuer of the Australian dollar, just like Russia, just like China, just like the UK, just like Canada, just like Japan. Many other countries have the exact same thing. So paying for the progressive agenda through MMT, it's really more a question of, do people understand what happened in 1971? Do people understand our financial system? Do people understand federal finance? And to a fault, I would say the average person, and I'm talking about like in that 90 percentile, unfortunately, thinks that the federal government should be run like a household budget. You saw 14% here thought the national debt was a big deal or deficits was a big deal. So that tells you we got a lot of work to do. Just 14%, that's enough to really kind of cause some problems. The reality is that having a deficit is a perfectly natural function of a federal government, of a currency issuing government. It's also important to understand that the national debt is nothing more than the sum total of every untaxed dollar in circulation, period. That's all the national debt is. The United States creates dollars whenever it writes a bill, doesn't have dollars just sitting in some bank somewhere, standing up big, those big greenbacks stacked up. Doesn't do that. What happens is that every time Congress writes a bill, they submit instructions to the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve then keystrokes those dollars into the Treasury's account. Now, all of a sudden, the Treasury went from, let's say, $0 in its account up to however many the bill said to add to its account. That's it. Nothing more than that, keystrokes. So now the Treasury will then spend that money into existence. It didn't exist 1 minute and it exists the next minute. How does that happen? Because that's the way currency works. That's the way a currency issuing government does things. They don't wait around for your hard-earned tax dollars. Your hard-earned tax dollars have nothing to do with spending on anything. In fact, it's interesting. Taxes are used to take money out of the economy, whereas federal spending is used to put money into the economy. So it's a circuit. So whenever you hear people saying, I don't want my hard-earned tax dollars going to Israel, I don't want my hard-earned tax dollars going to bombs, or I don't want, good news, they're not. They're being deleted upon receipt. Bad news is that people still think they are. So everybody gets all puckered and really angry about their hard-earned tax dollars going to lazy people over there, or going to something you don't like over there, funding abortions or funding wars and all these other things. Reality, your tax dollar at the federal level, it's deleted. It doesn't exist. It never gets recirculated. A government spent dollar is spent one time. It travels through the economy and then it's deleted when it's taxed out of the economy. So if we could get every, go ahead.
So let's talk about that more. So I guess one of the devil's advocates would say, well, what about inflation? I think you kind of just hinted at, how the federal government would deal with that. Can you talk about why inflation is not as, scary as one may seem when it comes to MMT?
Absolutely. So inflation is a very poorly understood phenomenon. But one of the things that is not poorly understood is that businesses are greedy. And when businesses see an opportunity, they raise prices. So sometimes you see inflation based on greedy businesses raising prices. But inflation isn't really about one price going up or another price going up. Inflation is about the general rise of all prices. And so you look at that inflation, that level, and we haven't seen any inflation in this country in forever. We're talking about around 2-3% inflation. They'd love to be able to create some inflation. They have not been able to do that. And in fact, you can see deflation in places like Japan. So one of the things that we need to understand is that, in a pandemic, for example, we talk about giving people some survival money, like a UBI during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, you look around, you've got supply chains completely botched. Let's look for those people that like gaming, PlayStation 5s and stuff like that. They don't have enough semiconductor or the conductors to be able to do the building the boards, the circuit boards, and to power those things. So that's what the backup is there. So the prices, if you go out there and try and buy those things on the secondary market, they're like $900, $1,000 per system. Reality is if they'd have had those things, they would be right back down to the regular price. So one of the things that MMT talks about when it comes to inflation is look at unemployment. Do we have unemployment? Well, right now we have massive unemployment. Under normal circumstances, a Federal Reserve has operated with its full employment mandate under something called NARU, which says we got to have a certain number of people unemployed to keep inflation at bay. If we don't have a bunch of people unemployed, then we might have runaway inflation. If we print money, we'll have inflation. Well, quantity theory of money, which was a Milton Friedman libertarian stance, was completely debunked. It's nonsense. It's a lie. But number two, the other thing is about scarcity of goods and services. So in other words, if we run out of gas prices are going to go up. If we run out of wood to build houses, price of lumber is going to go up. If we run out of water because water is polluted all over the place, the cost of water is going to go up. And you think about it, if one of those things like petroleum products is used in everything we produce, and suddenly the price of petroleum goes through the roof, well, the general price rise is going to be significant. That's going to happen. So those are the sorts of things you have to worry about. But when it comes to printing money and things like that, that has no bearing whatsoever. In fact, until you get to a point of full employment, you really don't have any concern, because It's really about the real resources that are available for purchase in the government's unit of account, which is the dollar in this case.
Grumbine goes on to echo Martin Luther King Jr.'s argument that a federal job guarantee ensures that all Americans have an economic right to a job. Grumbine expounds on this economic right by explaining the irrelevance of the argument that full employment would result in a high inflation rate. Inflation is not some monetary phenomenon. It is an issue that stems from the imbalances in scarcity and production.
So without boring everyone to tears about this, the fact of the matter is that you've been lied to your entire life, that our government could have been doing all of these things. In fact, we could have been giving a job guarantee to everyone, like MLK said at the beginning in that montage. He said straight up, give everyone a job with a good paying wage. And for those people where it is not feasible to provide a job guarantee, provide them with a guaranteed minimum income. He didn't say a UBI. There's a reason for that, because a UBI has no productive output, it has no price anchor, and it is purely status quo. And it's Silicon Valley, dream to get everyone to be consumption units so that they can push the gig economy. I'm here to tell you that a federal job guarantee offsets that and is a real game changer because it blocks companies from subsidizing poor wages. Anyway, to your point, though, inflation is not an issue right now simply because we have massive unemployment. We are nowhere near capped on our productive capacity, and it's not about money. Inflation is not a monetary phenomenon. It's a scarcity issue. It's a production issue. And so if you think about it in those terms, I don't think we have anything. In fact, there's no serious economist out there. Like I said, no serious economist out there talking about inflation right now. People like Stephanie Kelton are laughing, saying it's a non-factor, and she's right. It's a non-factor.
Exactly.
And
exactly. And I think we can see an example of that during the pandemic, as they literally just kind of moved some dollars over from the Fed and corporations got their bailouts.
Grumbine concludes his interview by taking a question regarding the difference between balancing the budget and balancing the economy, and the transformative effects a federal job guarantee would have going towards a balanced economy.
Thank you. And then a question that came from Virginia: what's the difference between balancing the budget and balancing the economy?
Well, budget is just an accounting trick. You look over there, you have two sides of the ledger. You've got assets and you've got, credits or debits and debts and so forth. And so you've got to be able to look at your balance sheet, and that's balancing the budget, making sure your inflows match your outflows. As far as balancing the economy goes, if you've got people struggling, if you've got people eating, out of a trash can or worse, just not eating at all and dying. And that's really what it comes down to. This austerity that we see, the lack of spending on people, has bred murder, in my opinion. This is not some accidental thing. This is not a mistake. This is straight up lethal killing. Okay. Austerity is murder. And so when we don't understand economics, the people in play that want to retain power, that like the gap just the way it is, so they can measure themselves against other people, those people right there are intentionally doing this. This is not an accident. And so when you think about balancing the economy, you got to think about, number one, resources. You've got to think about the environment. Steve Keen, very, very good at understanding the fullness of the environment mixed with the economy. You also have to consider the people, the quality of life. There's a lot of factors that go in there when you consider what a balanced economy looks like. And from an MMT perspective, MMTers would say, rather than balancing the budget, why don't we look at an inflation constraint? Because that seems to be the first thing that the Milton Friedman tainted mind has brought up, is what about inflation? We'll have hyperinflation. Oh my God, we're all going to die. What happens when the dollar isn't the world reserve currency? Blah, blah, blah. And they don't know anything about economics, but they know these horrible fear things. They got them drilled into their head because of intense propaganda. And it's been very effective at keeping us from each other. But imagine if we could institute a job guarantee that would allow immigrants to have a full life. Imagine if we could produce a job guarantee that could help people in rural America lead a full and healthy life. Imagine if we could make it so that the people in inner cities had a job guarantee, and then no more predatory hiring, no more crap wages, no more gig economy. And you talk about a de facto union of the people, a voters union. Talk about class warfare, fighting back, winning. That's where it's at right there. So a balanced economy is vital to class struggle. It also, to be fair, we need to really, really take a step back and think about, why are we not voting our way to these things? No matter what you've done, why have you not seen this? I'm 51. Why have I not seen that in 51 years? And the reality is that I don't believe that voting alone is going to get us there. We've got to be willing to have mutual aid. We've got to be willing to build systems counter to the establishment so that we can fight back and make it so that they must hear our demands. And to me, one of the most vital things right now is understanding that most of the concerns we as people have are created by a false scarcity narrative. So they make you feel like everybody's got to go to a soup line. We could have everyone eating fine right now. Really, at the end of the day, one of the most brutal parts of this quote unquote imbalanced economy is the fact that you can see someone laying under a bridge on a park bench with little ridges to keep the poor off the benches. And you can see this and nobody cares. They just walk right by because it's become so ingrained in our society to have tent cities, to have people poor, to have people killing each other. And I think it's vital that we have a balanced economy. And that is going to come from educating people on modern monetary theory, which describes, not institutes, we don't need to implement it, but it describes the way the system is today, and is the only way you would have gotten Bernie Sanders' platform through. It's the only way you'll see reparations in this country. It's the only way you'll see Medicare for all. It's the only way you'll see a job guarantee. It's the only way you'll see a Green New Deal. It's the only way you'll see student debt eliminated. So hopefully folks do pay attention, take an opportunity to read Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, and follow us at Real Progressives.
As you can see, once we begin to look at our economy through an MMT lens, we see that an equitable prosperity as a government policy is an attainable goal. Once we truly understand how the system really works, then we will see that the fear-mongering myths that have cycled through every primetime political hack's teleprompter is about as believable as the belief that our taxes fund spending. We have been conditioned to just accept houselessness and people starving as some inevitable product instead of the murderous effect of austerity politics. A balanced economy is vital to the class struggle going on day in and day out in this country. Once we see past the myths that we have been conditioned to believe, we see that progressive policies such as a federal job guarantee is attainable, but the only thing standing in our way is ourselves. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check us out at realprogressives.org and subscribe to get notifications on new video streams in YouTube, Periscope, Facebook, and Rockfin. Also, make sure to tune in to our Facebook each and every Sunday night for the premiere of our new episode of The Untouchables at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Thank you, and have a good week.